Well, the bilateral relationship between Turkey and European Union has a very long history. But if we focus on the last 2 decades, I think it's possible to talk about 3 major phases. The first phase, we started in 1999 when Turkey was declared a formal candidate country until 2006. I think it's useful to call that period the golden years of bilateral relations, because in that period, as I mentioned, Turkey was first declared as a candidate country and started negotiations with the European Union. And after a very long time period, for the first time in history, it became a real possibility for Turkey to become a member of the European Union. And at the time, the policymakers in Turkey, the civil society organizations, economic interest groups, overwhelming majority of the society were in favor of EU membership, and significant Europeanization reforms took place when it comes to political rights and individual freedoms, economic restructuration, and foreign policy priorities in order to meet EU conditionality. So this period, I think, was one of the important periods in Turkey's political history and in terms of Turkey-EU relations. But this period, I think, came to a standstill in 2006, mainly because of the Cyprus question at the time. I mean, I'm not going to go into the details of Cyprus question because it will take hours to discuss, but at the very basic level, Turkey's side argued that the European Union did not fulfill its promises and didn't lift the isolations over the northern side of the island, Cyprus Island. And the European Union asked the Turkish side to acknowledge Greek Cypriots as the legal representative of the entire island as Republic of Cyprus. So it was that stalemate created problems. But apart from this, I would say that starting from 2006 up until Arab Spring, Turkey relations entered into the second phase, which I call a stagnation period. It was a stagnation period mainly because of the diverging priorities of the parties. I mean, Turkey at that period, tried to develop a proactive approach and multidimensional approach in its foreign policy, and particularly prioritize improving relations, economic, cultural, and political relations with Middle East and North African countries. So Turkish foreign policy priorities started to change in early 2000s. And when we look at the European Union, we see that priorities gradually changed on the EU's front as well, mainly because of the internal problems of the European Union. Because as you know, after the constitutional stalemate in 2004, identity problems emerged as important impediments for furthering European integration. And then came the Eurozone crisis in 2009. I think Eurozone crisis has been the most existential crisis the European Union has ever faced. And after that period, because of these multiple crises, the European Union focused on internal restructuration and consolidation of its economic and political structures rather than prioritizing enlargement. And in that context, rather than dealing with Turkey as a complicated candidate, European Union mainly focused on its internal problems and challenges. So this second period from 2006 up until Arab Spring, I think, can be considered the period of stagnation in Turkey relations. But Arab Spring, I think, changed bilateral relations in a dramatic manner. And starting from that period onwards, I think we can talk about a period in which we observe the rise of functionalist cooperation in Turkey relations. I call it functionalist because the parties, again, realized that they have to work with each other. The migration crisis, especially in the aftermath of the Syrian civil war, turned out to be a very existential challenge again for the European Union, and Turkey played a very critical role on that regard, right? Turkey is now hosting more than 4.5 million Syrian refugees, and according to Turkish officials, Turkey has now spent more than $40 billion. So it's a huge amount, and migration is now an increasing challenge, or refugee crisis is an increasing challenge for the European Union countries as well. So the Europeans tried to cut a deal with Turkey, which we call readmission agreement. So the parties, again, intensified their cooperation. But this cooperation is functionalist and interest-based in the sense that it does not cover full membership prospect. So, Turkey's side obviously wants to cooperate with the European Union because migration is a transnational challenge for sure. And European Union also wants Turkey because it's not possible for the Europeans to deal with this issue without cooperating with important regional actors like Turkey. But beyond that, we do not see this relationship improves Turkey's membership prospect. So for the time being, from a membership point of view, I will say that the relations exist in name, but not much in substance. But from a functional point of view, for sure the parties are cooperating with each other. But apart from this, we also see significant conflict. I mean, Turkish side criticizes European Union, right? There's a kind of disappointment when it comes to not only Turkish policymakers, but also Turkish civil society. I mean, European Union is criticized on the ground that, I mean, the EU institutions do not criticize Turkey enough when it comes to individual rights and freedoms. I mean, the consolidation of democracy in the country. But apart from this, I mean, Turkish side also criticized the European Union on the ground that, I mean, Europeans are acting in a short-sighted manner and do not help enough to Turkey and other regional actors when it comes to refugee crisis and other issues, and obviously fulfilling promises. So, broadly speaking, I think we can talk about three major episodes over the last 2 decades, and it actually comes as an outcome of the diverging foreign policy priorities of the parties and increasing domestic challenges in a turbulent era. Well, actually, you are absolutely right. I mean, China is a game changer in international political economy, and we are living in perhaps post-hegemonic era, right? Especially when it comes to economic affairs, we see that China is becoming an increasingly assertive economic actor. Obviously, the United States is still the most important actor when it comes to political and military affairs. But obviously, from an economic point of view, China is becoming an increasingly key actor in global political economy and investing in different parts of the region, right? Africa, Latin America, Middle East and North African region, Europe. So China is everywhere. Chinese investors are everywhere, and countries in different parts of the world are trying to develop their bilateral relations with China for understandable reasons. And Turkey is not an exception from that point of view. And Turkish policymakers are also striving hard in order to improve bilateral relations. And when we look at the last 2 decades, for instance, we see that China is becoming an increasingly central player in Turkey's economic affairs. For instance, if you look at the trade volume between China and Turkey over the last 2 decades, we see that in 2001, for instance, the total trade volume was merely more than $1 billion. And now, as of 2018, this number increased to $23 billion. So over the last 2 decades, we are talking about 23-fold increase in bilateral trade volume. So this is huge. I mean, given the economic size of Turkey, given the short time span, it's a huge increase. But when we look at the composition of trade, I think problems emerge, especially for Turkey, because these bilateral trade relations mostly work in favor of Chinese. Because when we look at, for instance, Turkey's exports to China, we see that the figure is around $3 billion. It means that there is 20 billion trade deficit last year in Turkey-Chinese trade relations. So it's obviously a problem for Turkish economy in the long run because it contributes to the current account deficit, and in order to grow, Turkey needs foreign direct investment or other forms of foreign capital inflows. I mean, current account deficit is an important problem for Turkey, and trade deficit is the major component of Turkey's current account deficit. And improving trade relations with China and other emerging countries, other BRICS countries on that front is obviously important for Turkey, but there's a kind of asymmetry between export and import ratios, and Turkish policymakers are trying to deal with this challenge. I'm not sure how is it going to be possible to deal with this in the short run, because we know Chinese economy is huge. I mean, the economies of scale is very important, working in favor of China, and it's very difficult for Turkish entrepreneurs to remain competitive when it comes to bilateral relations with Chinese. But apart from that, Chinese are becoming important investors in Turkey as well. So far, they have invested more than $2 billion, according to official statistics. And Chinese are quite interested in investing in, for instance, infrastructure projects, railway projects, and these kind of huge mega projects. And Turkish side is also very interested in joining the Belt Road Initiative because, Turkish officials think that Turkey is positioning in a unique place between East and West and wants to become part of this changing global political economy equilibrium. But beyond that, I would say that increasing trade relations and investment relations obviously bring opportunity for both sides, but they also bring challenge, especially for the Turkish entrepreneurs in order to remain competitive with Chinese. Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you very much for this. TİKA is becoming an increasingly important actor in Turkish foreign policy and Turkey's soft power diplomacy. Actually, TİKA, Turkish Cooperation and Coordination Agency, was established in 1992. At the time, they aim was to improve bilateral economic, political, and cultural relations with the Turkish-speaking Central Asian countries. With the collapse of Soviet Union, as you know, new independent states were established in Central Asia, and these states were Turkish-speaking states. So, Turkish state at the time wanted to develop close collaboration and cooperation with these states, and TİKA was established within that particular context in order to improve all sorts of cultural, economic, and perhaps political relations with these countries. But the main transformation, I think, came with the rise of Justice and Development Party, right, in 2000s. In line with the transformation in Turkish foreign policy, TİKA also underwent significant transformation. Turkey is a middle power. Middle powers are not as powerful as great powers, but they are still important actors in their respective regions, right? They influence regional equilibrium. But we also know from the literature that middle powers target niche areas or specific areas in global governance in order to contribute to international affairs. And Turkish side determined this niche area, among others, as the humanitarian aid or humanitarian support. And from that point of view, TİKA became increasingly an important actor in Turkish foreign policy because, Turkish officials strived hard in order to position Turkey as a humanitarian actor in global affairs and invested a lot on that front. Just to give you a very basic number, an idea about the transformation Turkey underwent on that front, in 2001, for instance, Turkey's total development aid was around $85 million. And now, according to official statistics last year, this figure was more than $8 billion. So there is a huge improvement, there is a huge increase, and when we rank Turkey among other countries regarding development aid they commit, we see that Turkey is now among the leading countries. Turkish economy is a mid-sized economy, as I mentioned. Turkey is now 16th or 17th largest economy in the world, but when it comes to development aid, Turkey is now among the top countries in the world. So, in terms of its material capabilities, we can suggest that Turkey is punching above its weight when it comes to humanitarian aid issue. And this was, I think, an outcome of a deliberate strategy of the Turkish government to position Turkey as a humanitarian actor in its foreign relations. And TİKA, in that context, gained an increasingly important role because, on the one hand, TİKA kind of coordinated other state institutions regarding development aid and cooperation. And when it comes to foreign affairs, obviously TİKA is now operating in more than 150 countries and operating in 5 different continents. So Middle East and North Africa, because of geographical proximity, cultural proximity, for all these sorts of reasons, is an important region, but TİKA does not operate only in Middle East and North Africa. We see TİKA in African continent, we see in Latin America and different parts of the world. Regarding its independence from government policy, obviously TİKA is not an independent institution. TİKA is a government institution now operating under the auspices of Ministry of Culture and Tourism. So TİKA pursues government's policies, and what it does is incompatible with Turkish foreign policy priorities or the preferences of ruling elite in Turkey.
Thank you very much for all your answers, Professor Kutlay.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for this opportunity.